Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ladysmith Oceanside All Candidates Forum, which is being co-hosted by the Regional District of Nanaimo and the Nanaimo Regional Hospital District. My name is Stuart McLean, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Regional District of Nanaimo Board. I'm pleased to be opening the forum this evening on behalf of the RDN and NHRD. We respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish nations on whose traditional territory this meeting is taking place. The purpose of this forum is to provide residents the opportunity to hear from your MLA candidates and gather the information you may need to make an informed decision for the provincial election on October 19th. We hope that you find this opportunity engaging and helpful with your decision making. There are a few housekeeping items to cover before we begin. Washrooms are located to the right of the main doors, down to the left. Water service is provided by the Nanaimo Resort, so please help yourself. We will try our best to end the forum promptly at 8:30 for an informal meet and greet with the MLA candidates at the end of the evening. The forum this evening will be recorded and later posted to the RDN YouTube channel. The forums will also be broadcast by Czech News, Nanaimo News Now, and Rogers Community TV. At this time, we request that you avoid connecting to the building's Wi-Fi and turn cellular devices to silent or in airplane mode. We recognize that you may have family or children at home this evening and may need to take a call during the event, so if so, just please take it outside and return after the call. This forum is a non-partisan event. Please refrain from waving campaign banners, signs, or other campaign materials. Our moderators will conduct the meeting and have the responsibility to interrupt the proceedings to enforce the House rules and forum format. We ask that candidates and audience members please respect the authority of the moderators. We also ask that all candidates speak with a courteous tone and avoid inflammatory statements and name calling, and speak when it is their turn. Please refrain from making any sounds or gestures that may be considered distracting while others are speaking. Audience sounds and gestures to show agreement or disagreement, such as clapping, are permitted. However, we ask that they be made in a courteous tone and manner, only when candidates are not speaking, and be very brief so as not to cut into the time that the candidates have. If it becomes disruptive, the moderators reserve the right to step in. So, with all that rules out of the way, we would like to thank the MLA candidates for joining us today. We'll have an opportunity for each of you to introduce yourselves in a moment. We would also like to thank our media partners, Czech News, Nanaimo News Now, a division of Pattison Media, and Rogers Community TV, who will be broadcasting the forum at a later time or making the recording available online. So, sorry.
This is billed as an all-candidates meeting, and I understand that there are actually 4 candidates in this contest.
That is correct. Well, all I can say is that all candidates were extended an invitation, and unfortunately only 2 were able to be here tonight. So we thank those 2 for coming, and I cannot give reasons why the other candidates are not here. You would have to ask them directly.
So
we're missing the Conservative candidate and the Green Party candidate. That's correct. Yes. They were invited. That's all I can say. Thank you. So today's moderators are Alex Ronsley, and Ian Holmes from Pattison Media. Alex Ronsley is the news director for Island Radio in Nanaimo and Parksville, managing news content for 4 local radio stations and online news portal Nanaimo News Now. He's been in the role since 2019. Alex has been a broadcast media professional for nearly 20 years, covering multiple municipal, provincial, and federal election campaigns in Prince George, the Sunshine Coast, and Vancouver Island. Ian Holmes is a local journalist with Pattison Media, which includes Nanaimo News Now and 4 mid-Vancouver Island radio stations, The Wave and Wolf in Nanaimo, as well as beach and lounge radio stations in Parksville. Ian focuses on local issues, including civic politics, healthcare, education, as well as extensive criminal justice reporting. And last, but certainly not least, is Lisa Robotham from the RDN team, who will be filling the role of timekeeper this evening. Now, I will turn it over to the moderators.
Okay, thank you very much, Vice Chair McLean. Before we provide an opportunity for candidates to introduce themselves and speak more on their platforms, I'd like to review some of the format that we will be following this evening. Audience members will not be able to ask questions from the floor this evening. Residents were invited to submit questions in advance by online submission or email prior to tonight. Questions were selected from the submissions received, along with regional topics that have been brought to the RDN and NRHD boards over the last year, and we thank everyone that took part in that engagement session. We asked that each candidate respect the clock for tonight. We will have a timer to help hold you to account on that. We'll be giving you a 30-second sign to wrap up your opening statements and responses to questions. We'll also hold up a separate sign to draw your time to a close. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce themselves and give an opening statement on their party's election platform and their priorities in the riding. Following the round of introduction, we will ask candidates predetermined questions from the engagement sessions. Candidates were provided the questions in advance and have had time to prepare responses to tonight's questions.
Each candidate will be given up to 2 minutes to respond to the question without interruptions from the other candidates or members of the public here in the gallery. The timekeeper will provide a 30-second signal demonstrated here, and then when time is up, card will demonstrate that as well. We will vary the order in which each candidate answers questions, just out of fairness. Following the round of responses to each question, candidates will have the opportunity for a brief 1-minute rebuttal, and we ask the candidates hold up their green rebuttal sign should they want to offer a rebuttal. At the close of the question and answer period, candidates will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. And finally, candidates are expected to speak with a courteous and professional tone here this evening, and only permitted to speak when it's their turn. Candidates must also refrain from making any sounds or gestures that may be considered distracting while others are speaking, and failure to behave appropriately will result in a warning from us, the moderator team. And the gallery, please be respectful. They're running for public office, and let's just keep the tone nice and professional and hear what they have to say.
It's a pretty rowdy room.
Opening addresses coming up momentarily. Just to clarify, Laura Ferreira of the Green Party did not respond to an invitation, and also from the Conservative Party, Mr. Brett Fee, he did not respond to the invitation to speak here this evening. So now we'll open up with the 3-minute opening address, and up first will be Stephanie Higginson from the NDP.
Thank you. Ait Swale, Ait Sepka for inviting me here tonight. A little bit about myself. I live at the south end of this riding with my 2 teenagers and my husband on a small farm. I was a school trustee for 8 years, and during that time I was elected by my colleagues to be president of all of the school trustees for the BC School Trustees Association for 3 consecutive terms. And I am really grateful to see so many of you here tonight. It really shows how engaged you are in this very important process. Every day right now, well, not today, but even yesterday when it was pouring rain, I've been knocking on doors. I've been talking to you and to your neighbors, and what I'm hearing from folks is how much you love this community, but I'm also hearing how uncertain people are feeling right now. And I agree. I agree that this is a really great place to live. It's why I'm raising my family here. But I also agree that the future feels uncertain. And that is why I joined David Eby's team and the BC NDP. David has spent his whole life showing up to the most difficult places and helping people through uncertainty. And as I knock on the doors, I'm hearing from you about your concerns regarding healthcare and specifically about your access to a family doctor. And while that wait list remains long, I do have some encouraging news. Since April 1st, we have seen 1,030 patients attached to family doctors in the Oceanside Primary Care Network. The work is not done, but we are finally starting to see progress. People are telling me that affordable housing is critical in this riding, and I agree. It's one of the reasons why I run. One of my children said to me, I will never be able to afford to buy a house. But I can tell you that the BC Homes for People Action Plan is starting to work. It has translated to over 2,100 homes completed or underway in the region. It includes 213 affordable housing units in Parksville, 59 in Qualicum, 36 in Ladysmith, and in Parksville we funded the Orca Place, which created 52 homes for people experiencing homelessness. And I know this one's hard to believe, but this NDP government actually has a strong record on the economy. We have the fastest growing economy of any major province. Since 2017, we've created more than 250,000 jobs. This includes the strongest private sector job growth in the country in the past year, and we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, and in the last 2 years, BC has attracted a record-setting $117 billion in private capital investment. As a person who loves this community, I also worry about the risks of this election. We can't afford to go backwards. We are finally starting to see incremental gains on all of this work. The BC NDP is focused on putting people first, not profits, and that's why I'm part of this team that will work for you every day if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And now up to 3 minutes for independent candidate Adam Walker.
It is so great to see so many of you here today. Before I begin, I want to recognize we're on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo and Qualicum First Nation. And I also want to take a moment to quickly thank the RDN, both the board for putting this on, but also staff for the last several weeks making this happen. Can we give them a round of applause for making this a possibility tonight? For those of you who don't know me, you'll hear me echoing through this room. My name's Adam Walker. I've lived in this community my whole life. My background is a small business owner in a technology space, and my wife is working as a registered nurse in our community. I'm raising my 2 daughters on a small farm in Qualicum Beach, and I just absolutely love to be able to call this place my home. I served on Qualicum Beach Council, and in 2020 I was elected MLA for Parksville Qualicum. And it is without a hesitation the greatest honor and privilege that I've ever had in my life, to be able to serve this community. It's a terrible thing to admit, but I told staff that every time we get an email, every time we get a phone call, offer to set up a meeting with people. And I met with, and we arranged 3,000 constituent meetings over the last 4 years. And it is such an amazing community to be able to represent. Most of those were about healthcare, most of those were with seniors, most of those weren't good news stories. But you know what impresses me is that more often than not during those meetings, people would end and say, how can I help? How can I be a part of the solution? What can we do together to fix this problem? We are so fortunate to be able to live in a community where people are willing to step up and be involved as part of solutions. We've got a lot done in the last 4 years, and Stephanie went through a lot of that, but we've also got a lot of challenges that we're facing. And you know, the biggest barrier that I see to getting things done is actually party politics. We have a government right now that has a health plan for this area that was approved in 2019, and instead of admitting that it's a failure and that the number of people waiting for a doctor that's doubled, we just watch that wait list get bigger and bigger. Stephanie says that there's 1,000 people taken off that list. Well, every month, 200 to 400 people get added to it. That's a problem. But to make matters worse, this government just cut a $2 million health center in Coombs that was supposed to open in February. A health center that has 5 patient exam rooms that was supposed to give people hope that they were going to get connected with a family doctor. We need, after this election, an MLA that's ready to get going, an MLA that can start running right away. The last 6 months as the independent MLA for this area, we developed a comprehensive plan for a health center in the city of Parksville. We have the solutions that we need. I have the experience that we need, and I hope we can work together through this election, and I hope that I can earn your support so we can keep moving forward together and tackle some of these challenges once and for all as a community. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Adam.
Okay, candidates, we will move on to the questions. As a reminder, candidates will have opportunities to offer a rebuttal after all candidates have responded to the question. We will alternate the order in which the questions are asked and have the opportunity to speak first. Mr. Walker, since you were second to offer your introduction, I'll direct the first question to you. The regional district of Nanaimo has one of the fastest growing and oldest populations in Canada. These trends are expected to continue. A high percentage of seniors, more so than the rest of the province, and a population with higher healthcare needs. Also, the complexity of that medical care continues to grow across the entire Central and North Island, with increasing needs and demands at Nanaimo Regional General Hospital. The facility is outdated and does not currently meet modern standards for care. There's also significant disparages between healthcare infrastructure, below the Malahat, south of the Malahat in the Victoria region, as well as the Central and North Island, both in terms of specialist space and doctors providing different specialities, including cardiology and oncology. How will you campaign and how will you advocate for the region to bring more specialized services to residents of the Central and North Island area? Mr. Walker.
Great question. We in the Central Vancouver Island for far too long have been forgotten by government. Our ferry service is a failure. Our highways are inadequate. And as this community grows, we're seeing a lot of significant challenges, especially in healthcare. That hospital in Nanaimo was built in 1963, has 360 beds, and it is rare for there to be less than 400 patients in that hospital at one time. That means 40 or 50 or 60 people are in closets, are in hallways, receiving the type of healthcare that we do not expect and not the type of healthcare that we've paid for in this community. For the last year as an independent MLA, I've been trying everything I can to hold government to account. This heart catheterization facility that we need at this hospital is desperate. I, once a month, have heard from patients who have gone to that hospital, a routine issue, heart attack, easily treatable. And yet they've gone to that hospital that doesn't have the heart facilities, and I hear from their family members about the permanent damage that they've received to their heart, or even worse, heard of people who have died because our hospital is inadequate. There is solutions that we can do for this. I've been working with a constituent in this community who has identified a company in the States that can bring up a heart catheterization mobile lab to this hospital within 3 months. That's something that we should be putting pressure on government for. It costs about $75,000 a month. We can get that going right away. We don't have to wait. We can put pressure on government to get that fixed. The other thing that we need is a patient tower. That's not going to happen overnight, but we need to make sure that when patients are admitted to that hospital that they're able to receive the best possible care, and that the staff that work in that hospital are able to work in a facility where they can go to work with pride and not feel like they're going to a place that's unsafe. I'll continue to advocate for this community, and I'll continue to make sure that government is held account so that we get those investments that we desperately need.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Higginson.
Thank you. I'm glad that my fellow candidates spent a lot of time talking about the hospital tower, because today I was at an announcement where David Eby has committed to building that tower. That was a pleasant announcement to be at, and I'm really happy to hear that the government has recognized this, and that is because we have put record generational investments into the Central Island Health. We have put in a new ICU, we're building a new high acuity wing, we're building a new cancer care center. When we're putting in all of this infrastructure, there was a very clear recognition that when you put that infrastructure in, you also need to improve the patient tower, which we've done. Hearing that there's an aging population, which is very critical to keep in mind in this riding, we've also put in and promised and are starting to build 300 new long-term care beds in the area in Landsville that will help free up hospital space, because people are waiting. My father died in the hospital, not in Nanaimo, in another hospital, waiting for long-term care. So this will free up space that is critical and needed. And when you look at that whole package, that is a generational investment. We have put in a new hospital in Duncan, a new hospital in Cowichan. There's going to be a new hospital in Nanaimo with a cancer care center, a high acuity wing, and a new ICU. That is generational investment in the Central Island. The work is not done, and we recognize that. And I give credit to the hospital board for their very, very strong advocacy. And we didn't do this alone. We did this with the regional districts, with the local councils who have taken the risk to raise people's municipal taxes so that they can be ready when those investments come. And when I hear people complaining to me on the doorsteps right now about those municipal tax raises, I tell them why. Because the only way we can improve the healthcare in this Central Island beyond the generational investment is to make sure that we're doing it together and that we have each other's backs, and we keep moving forward on that list identified by the hospital board.
Thank you, Ms. Higginson. Seeing no request for rebuttal, we'll move to the next question.
And this is for Stephanie Higginson off the top here. This question, what attributes do you have that best suit you to be the MLA for this riding?
Well, I have experience at the provincial level already that's a proven track record as a collaborator. During the COVID pandemic, I was president of the BC School Trustees Association. That was 60 boards of education. BC was the largest jurisdiction in North America to offer uninterrupted learning to students during the pandemic. It was a monumental task. I worked closely with all 60 boards of education, with the provincial health officer, with the deputy provincial health officer, who is now the chief medical officer of Vancouver Island, and with 2 ministers of education. That collaboration and those relationships have stayed with me because I was a respected leader amongst my colleagues and amongst the provincial ministers that I worked with. And in fact, those relationships have been key as I've moved through the election. I've kept them, I've collaborated and continued to collaborate, and it's only through collaboration and working together with other levels of government, with the constituents, that we are going to solve the many, many intersecting crises that we are all facing right now.
Same question to you, Adam Walker. What are your top attributes that best suit you to be the MLA for Ladysmith Oceanside?
We've got a lot of challenges in this community, and it's not just healthcare. We've got a lot of people who can't afford to live here anymore. I regularly had seniors coming through my office that had rented in this community for a long time, got priced out of their homes, and are living in their cars in this community or have had to leave. We've got challenges with mental health, with addiction, with treatment. There's a lot of things that working in Victoria, those connections, those experiences, that's important. But you know what's most important is working with people in this community. We're not going to solve a lot of these problems waiting for Victoria, talking to a minister. I've been in the NDP as a backbench member, complaining and raising issues that directly impacted us. The way to get things done in this community is to work collaboratively with people, and I think that's my biggest strength, and it's something that I've exemplified over the last 4 years as the MLA. We got to listen, we got to work together, we got to collaborate, and that's how we get things done. And my track record and my experience proves how we can do that, and I'm looking forward to continuing that potentially for the next 4 years. I'm seeing that we got 3 minutes or 2 minutes per question, and we got questions that are probably done. If we try to keep these short, we might be able to squeeze some questions from the floor, so I'll try to be quick moving forward.
The Ladysmith Oceanside riding is perhaps one of, certainly geographically, the most unique, not only on the island, but in British Columbia. Even on stage tonight, the 2 participants, Adam, I know that you are based in the Qualicum Beach area. Stephanie, you mentioned earlier from the southern end of this riding. 2-part in terms of your initial plans on basing a constituency office or potentially multiple in the riding, and how will you go about representing different communities with different goals, ambitions, effectively in a single riding? Mr. Walker, to you.
Yeah, the riding's wild. I'm not gonna argue with that one. Our communities are spread apart, but they're really quite the same. You know, we've got a lot of our downtown cores are amazing. We've got a lot of retirees. We've got a lot of young families, and we share a lot of the same values. As an independent MLA, when I went from being a party MLA to being independent, my office budget doubled, and so we went from having 2 staff to 6 staff. And so one of the things that I see as a strength that I can offer to this constituency is the fact that I'll be able to have an office both in Qualicum Beach and Ladysmith that's open full-time, that's got hours that are extended to the point where people can actually feel served. It's very difficult with a regular budget to be able to do that. You've got room for 2 staff. And so I think by having an anchor and a base in both communities, that's going to be absolutely integral to be able to represent this unique constituency.
Ms. Higginson, leveraging obviously your familiarity with the southern end of this riding and basing further in the north, your plans for constituency offices and representing such a diverse area.
Well, ideally, we would have 2 offices, one in each end of the community, and that's what I would advocate for. This is set by the Ledge, and so once elected, if I'm elected, that is what I would advocate for. I think it's the only way that you can actually properly meet with and represent this very strange riding that we all have. And I actually don't think that we are all that different. We are 3 communities that have on a regular basis felt annoyed that we were lumped in with Nanaimo and felt like Nanaimo hogged all of our air and that we didn't get enough because Nanaimo has so many people who live there and everybody just focused on Nanaimo. But what I actually see is that we, as I've been knocking on doors, we have a lot in common. And so I think it's actually, I'm looking forward to the ability to work with the community. And I think that it would be naive to think that having all of your staff situated up in the riding would benefit you. It would not benefit this community to have all of our staff up here. Part of being part of a party is that you pool your resources and you have staff in Victoria that work in Victoria with the policymakers, with the decision makers, in committee. You don't get to be on committee if you are an independent. In committee with sorry, in committees and with the staff there that can work on, producing reports for you, all these types of things. So I think it's really important to remember that when you're part of a party, you're part of a pooled resource opportunity as well. And so 2 offices would be my goal, and that's sure what I will fight for. And I do think that these 3 communities that have been put together have a lot in common. And what I'm actually really looking forward to is being able to advocate for those 3 communities based on the needs of those communities and not have to worry about a disparate voting population that may be lumped into a city that doesn't actually have the same needs. We are definitely connected to Nanaimo, and we need to remember that, and we need to work very closely with those MLAs as well.
Mr. Walker, I did see a rebuttal sign. If you wished to rebut, you have a minute to do so.
Yeah, I've participated in committees as an independent, but nobody here cares about that. What people care about is that they are able to be heard in their community. It's not about advocating for that space. You have a limited budget. It's $166,000 a year. It works out to 2 full-time staff. The question that we heard from the moderator here was, will you have an office in both communities, and what will that look like? And it's not about advocacy. It's about having that plan. And what I'm asking you is, have you put together that plan, and what would that look like? What can the community expect in that?
Ms. Higginson, if you'd like to respond.
Oh, we're allowed to respond to the rebuttals?
You're allowed a minute to the rebuttal if you would like.
Oh, that's excellent. I did not realize that. It's been a busy day. So no, I haven't put together the plan because I have a really strong team that I will be working with that will put together that plan if I'm elected and if I'm given the chance to do that. And I think it is about advocacy. And currently in the South End, the MLA has an office in Ladysmith and an office in Nanaimo. So I'm really confident that this is possible, but I'm also someone who knows enough not to make promises that I can't keep. And so, and I'm not going to do that. So I know that I can effectively represent this disparate riding. I did it when I was president of the BC School Trustees Association. I effectively represented 60 boards of education across the province with different political views and different needs during COVID, and it worked. We kept schools running, and our students are better off for it. So I know how to do this. I'm not worried about it.
Thank you, Ms. Higginson.
A question for you, Stephanie. Affordable in-treatment addiction programs, something that's scarce within this Mid-Island region. How important is a service like that, and what's the importance of bolstering that kind of amenity here in the riding?
Oh, during a toxic drug crisis, this is one of the most important things that we can be working on. And the Pathway to Hope document, which is and the Pathway to Recovery documents have seen us deliver 650 beds across the province and about 50 new treatment beds in the area. And so, I think that this is one of the most important things that we are facing. We're seeing the impacts everywhere. This is our family. These are our neighbors. And we have to keep on the plan. And we are starting to see results of that as we're introducing more and more in-community treatment beds. And we've just introduced a plan to have in-community involuntary care beds that will actually be really beneficial to the other treatment issues that we're facing, because we're talking about families that are, or patients that are taking up 90% of the space and 90% of the staff time, when really they're about 10% of the population. So if we can start focusing on the in-treatment community, involuntary care in community, then what we can do is free up that staff to start focusing on other folks in the community that really need those resources. And we're starting to see the results of that.
Adam, inpatient addiction treatment services here in the region, what's the lay of the land from your perspective on that? Is there enough? What more can be done?
It's brutal right now. I've talked to lots of parents and siblings who have lost their loved ones, either children or spouses, or so, and it's awful. I met a woman about 6 months ago, and she was trying to get her son, it was a little longer than that, was trying to get her son into involuntary care in Redfish Healing Center. And they were told it was 18 months to get in. And she called and she did everything she could, I did everything I could, and eventually this gentleman froze to death with fentanyl in the system in our community. The idea of keeping on this plan, the idea of continuing down this direction is shameful. We are losing far too many people in our communities right now because of the toxic drug crisis. And what we need is we need to ensure that there is on-demand treatment. We need to make sure that when somebody says, I need help, that they get that help. The idea of sticking to this plan and slowly adding beds here and there is not working. I don't look to Alberta politics very often and say, that's the bastion of hope. But that's a government that has invested heavily in treatment, and they have seen the deaths from drug toxicity drop so much faster than whatever we're doing here. We need to do better. I just learned about a facility just south of Prince George called Baldy Hughes. It's an old military base, it's nonprofit run, and folks can go there for free for up to 3 years to get their lives back on track. They've got a farm, they've got work opportunity. The whole point is to give people not just that time to heal themselves physically from that chemical dependence, but it's to give them hope and meaning in life. We need more of that, and we need that in our community. We need to build a residential treatment facility in this community that's large enough that we can make sure that whenever somebody says, I need help, that they get that help.
Along those same lines, this region, Vancouver Island, the Central Island, British Columbia, continues to lose hundreds, if not thousands of people every year to drug toxicity and drug poisoning. 53.4 deaths per 100,000 people from the province so far in 2024. What is your position, what is your position, rather, I should say, on mandatory involuntary care to help address both substance use and mental health challenges? Adam.
In the Venn diagram of problems that people face, you've got mental health challenges and you've got addiction, and they are not necessarily the same. You've got folks that need involuntary care because they've got mental health challenges that are impacting the community, and you've got addiction treatment challenges. Involuntary care is something that we already have in BC. We have 20,000 people a year that rely on involuntary care, and it makes communities safer. The challenge is that we have a system that's overrun. I talked to somebody else who actually admitted her own son through involuntary care. It can be done. She went to the courthouse in Nanaimo, she filled out the forms, and her son was detained. And she thought for a moment that her son would get the help that he needed. And he was admitted to Nanaimo Regional General Hospital, and the team there was amazing. But less than 24 hours later, he was discharged in a hospital gown and left with no follow-up plan. The challenge we have is not that the legislation is broken. The challenge is that we have inadequate facilities to look after people that need help. Whether we're talking about psychiatric treatments, whether we're talking about addiction treatments, there's overlap there for sure, but they're not the same. We need to build those facilities out. The idea of keeping on this plan, is not good enough. We need to do better for those people. We have lost way too many people in this community, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to save lives.
Stephanie, you spoke briefly about involuntary care earlier this evening. Just I'll ask you to elaborate on those thoughts, your viewpoint on its role in addressing drug toxicity, mental health, substance use.
Well, I think that we agree that what's been happening hasn't been working. And that's why just 2 weeks ago, the government announced a different plan, a new plan and a change. And that was a plan that was put together by experts that were hired last year because we recognized that what was happening was not working. BC has always had involuntary care, and in fact, this government made it easier by changing the process to have it go from one doctor being required, or 2 doctors being required, to 1. And so we know that we need more services and facilities. That's why we're partnering with local communities to create those spaces and facilities so that people can receive the help that they need, particularly people that have the concurrent issues of addiction, mental health, and brain injury. And that's what I was talking about when I was talking about, 90% of the issues being caused by 10% of the people. We need to make sure that these folks can receive the care that they need and deserve with dignity in the communities that they live. And that's why we announced a plan to deal with it 2 weeks ago. It's starting in Maple Ridge, and then there will be regional centers across the province, including on Vancouver Island. This is a plan that was put together by experts in the field, like world experts in the field, not just people from BC, but world experts in the field, in order to help solve this problem so that we can then also free up the staff and the space for other folks who need them, who don't have necessarily those concurrent issues, but might have the addiction or the brain injury or the mental health. So we agree that more needs to be done, and we're taking action to do it, and we've started the plan. We've started to make a difference.
Thank you.
And sticking with the social safety net theme here, there's been a lot of talk about the need for a permanent winter cold weather shelter in Parksville with the increasing needs in that community. What's your stance on that issue? Is permanent funding something for a service like that, something that you support, and why? Stephanie?
Listen, I agree that every community needs to have a permanent cold weather shelter. They need to be safe, they need to be supportive, they need to be predictable and reliable. They need to reflect the needs of the communities they serve. They need to be open 24/7 for 6 months, and they need to have enough beds to provide safe space for the people and provide the safe space for the people who are in them. But people who are experiencing this understand how complicated this can be. And particularly when you think about the overlapping issues that are involved here. Shelters require zoning, they require a society that has a registration in good standing, they require a solid plan that's co-created with the service provider, with the community that they're going to be in, and most importantly with the immediate neighbors who will serve the needs of these folks. And one of the most difficult things to do when you are bringing these shelters to life is, once you've found the building with the proper zoning and a service provider and an agency that's going to be able to do it, is to make sure that you have a good neighbor agreement. And if you're still with me, then I give you credit, because it is complicated, these processes. And I do agree that there's probably a lot of ways that we can streamline this and make it easier, but you can't do that without working with the communities that you're going to be doing this in and the neighborhoods that you're going to be doing it in. And I actually credit Orca Place. They are a really good example, and I think a gold standard. It's not a cold weather shelter at all, but the way that that was brought out in the community and the way that the community has welcomed the 52 beds there is a model that we can all use. So I do believe that these are important. I do support them, and I will, as your MLA, broker the conversations to support the process to develop that very tricky good neighbor agreement. And I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in the process to make sure that people have safe, reliable, warm places to sleep that recognize that, with dignity, what these people deserve.
Same question to you, Adam Walker. Cold weather permanent winter shelter in Parksville. Is that something that you think is needed for the community?
100% it is. We have a growing number of seniors and a growing number of youth, let alone everybody else, but it's really stark to see a senior unhoused, or someone who's under 16 or under 14 that's unhoused in this community, and we're seeing those numbers increase. And that's something that should worry all of us. What concerns me is when my friend here mentions that we need to have 24-hour shelters. Well, this government doesn't fund 24-hour cold weather shelters. They fund 12-hour cold weather shelters. When she says that we need a good good neighbor agreement, BC Housing doesn't allow those for certain types of cold weather shelters. What's most disturbing of all is we actually have an application to BC Housing right now. There's a location selected in Parksville. There's a nonprofit there. There's staff that's there. And what's actually preventing the cold weather shelter is that this government is adding new restrictions last minute that aren't being required of other communities. People here deserve to have the dignity of a place to stay at night if they cannot afford to live here. Most of these folks have been here for a very long time. And the fact that government right now is actually obstructing a cold weather shelter from opening that was supposed to open right after this weekend is very disturbing for me.
We have spoken considerably about healthcare and related issues this evening. I did want to cover some different topics throughout this evening to ensure that we get a good cross-section. Mr. Walker, what do you see as the future of the Island Rail Corridor?
Well, I'm trying to stay less than 3 minutes because I want questions from the floor here. The challenge with the Island Rail Corridor right now is that province did not fund the rehabilitation of the line. There was a request into the Ministry of Transportation. That request was ignored. That led to a court challenge and the federal government actually stepping up and saying, we're going to give some of the land back. Snanawas has actually already pulled up the lines through their territory there and through their reserve. And so the future of that corridor is very different than what it could have been a couple of years ago. I would like to see more active transportation along it. I see that corridor itself as a hugely valuable asset that is co-owned by all of us. It's half owned by First Nations, half owned by regional districts. This is an asset that should be maximized. The fact that we can't get from Qualicum Beach to Dashwood by bike in a safe way is something that we can fix, and that's something that that corridor could help us with. And we also need to think into the future. This island is growing very quickly. I don't know if you guys have noticed. But we need to plan for an alternate route. Our highways cannot be expanded in many portions to be wider, and we need to plan ahead so that when the population goes from 1 million to 2 million, that we've got ways of getting around. So I think most importantly is that that corridor remain as intact as possible, that we find uses for it now, but we continue the planning process to make sure that when we are a much bigger place, that that is able to be used for moving people.
Ms. Higginson, in all its different iterations through the riding and down island, your vision and your priorities for the Island Rail Corridor?
I think our vision is that the province actually gains control of that 96% of the corridor while respecting the 4% of the segments through First Nations lands for future partnerships. We're supporting 6 regional districts and First Nations with $18 million grant to help plan and determine the future of the island corridor right now. And along that 300-kilometer corridor, there's a lot of different ideas about what we should be doing in the short and the medium-term use. They include things like using them for recreation, on the rails or beside the rails, whether we should be restoring passenger trains and commercial freights along the rail service, emergency vehicle services, or a detour when the Malahat was closed, as we saw a couple of years ago. But the BC-NDP is committed to finding the best use for the rail corridor, as well as supporting the First Nations rights and jurisdictions and interests in these discussions. Everybody agrees that the corridor needs to be preserved for long term because of its transportation use. As Vancouver Island grows, the population grows, and as was just said, in a decade or so, we're going to reach capacity for the island highways. And that's why the corridor is important to keep as an option for goods and people movement. Let's own that like we own our own highways while still respecting that 4% of the segments that go through First Nations jurisdiction.
Mr. Walker, I saw a rebuttal request. 1 minute.
Certainly. So I hear the request that the province is going to get this land back. This land is half owned by First Nations. Is it the BC-NDP's plan to compensate First Nations for taking that land back? And are the regional districts that currently own that land also going to be compensated?
It is 4% of the segments that go through First Nations land, is my understanding at this point. And so there is a plan to maintain the corridor as it is because we do recognize the important value of that 300 kilometers of rail line in order for what it can do for us in the future. There's a real recognition that this is a valuable asset that we need to treat like we do, like we recognize our highways.
Thank you.
Housing and grocery costs remain high throughout the region, everywhere for that matter, and a lot of families, seniors, are having difficulty meeting their basic needs. What can you do to help people cover their basic expenses and just be in a better financial situation with inflation and other pressures really gripping a lot of people over the past few years here? And Stephanie, that's a question for you. Cost of living.
Yeah, cost of living is critical right now, and I think this government is actually working really hard to address this with folks. This is things like, saving you $500 a year on your ICBC rates, capping hydro rates, and putting in the Fuel Tax Transparency Act that actually saw us lose that 13 cents per liter of gas that was inexplainable. Free birth control. These are things that are really making a difference for folks, and most importantly, our childcare, which might not be as important to the folks in this room, but for someone who, thank you, there's a few folks in here that see it as very important. I talked to a woman who was paying over $1,400 a month for childcare before our $10 childcare plan went in, and that has gone down to $320 a month. These are like life-changing savings that we're offering, and we're very, very focused on trying to support people through the affordability crisis right now.
Adam, for you, cost of living, it's expensive these days. Inflation pressures have dropped a little bit, but a lot of people are struggling, people of all ages. What can you do to help address that?
At a provincial level, to be frank, there's not a lot that we can do to bring down the cost of food, but there is a lot we can do to bring down the cost of real estate. And this is one thing that I've been pressuring government to do, is to look at how we can create new communities in our province to take some of this pressure off. When you've got more people moving here than you have homes, it naturally will bring up the cost of housing. If you don't do initiatives that help increase that supply, we're going to continue to live in this spiral. And we see that right now. We see the challenges of the high cost of real estate. It drives up the cost of wages, drives up the cost of basic food. I think what we need to make sure that we do is find private sector solutions to create more housing in new communities, to take pressure off of our local communities. But we also need to work to create more food resilience and food security on the island. We produce less than 10% of the food that we eat. It wasn't that long ago, a few generations ago, where we produced 85%. If we want to bring the cost of food down, if we want better quality food, we need to start growing it right here on the island, and we need to work with folks that own agricultural land that is underutilized, connect them with young agrarians, and expand those programs so that we can start feeding people here in our communities.
I believe there's a rebuttal here. Stephanie, 1 minute rebuttal on that. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do want to point out that we actually are working with private investors on addressing the cost of housing, and that is through providing low-interest loans to developers to build housing. And our housing plan is actually looked at as the envy of Canada, and is actually starting to have strong results on lowering the cost of housing, both in our community but across British Columbia. And 300,000 middle-class homes is not something to look away at. And those homes are actually starting. We've seen rents go down by removing the speculation and vacancy tax, has put 20,000 empty homes back into long-term rentals. We've cut red tape and barriers to construction, and that's getting more housing built quickly. We're not going to go and build new towns in towns where they don't exist. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but what we can do is remove red tape and make sure that we're getting houses online quicker, and that is, this BC housing plan is having a very, very noticeable effect on housing affordability in this province.
That's a minute. Thank you very much. We broke our own rules by having a double rebuttal earlier. Stephanie, you benefited from that. So Adam, it's your turn. I think that you indicated
Sure.
you may want to rebut to that, I believe.
Sure,
Is that
sounds
right?
great. Who here thinks that rents are down more than they were a year ago or 7 years ago? This BC housing plan, just the Community Housing Fund, $19 billion for affordable housing. We need affordable housing, 100%. But when you take all of these costs and aggregate them, and you figure out what it costs every working person in this province, over the last 7 years, every working person in this province has paid probably close to $10,000 in taxes to build homes, affordable homes. We need those affordable homes, but it's a lottery. We are building affordable homes in our community, but the last one that opened up here, we had a wait list of 400 people, and there were something like 50 spaces there for them. And those are people who have waited on the list long enough. We got to get away from the idea of just throwing money at this problem. Look at it as a policy. Look at it as, that's what we're supposed to do, is set clear, predictable policies that lead to increased supply, not just throw money at it. What's that? Not just keep throwing money at it and hope that this problem will go away.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
As we sit here this evening, drivers in British Columbia are paying an average of $1.63.9 per litre for a litre of gasoline. Those in Manitoba, $1.28.5, Alberta, $1.43.1. While many factors go into the cost of gasoline, what is your view on fuel taxes in BC, with BC residents paying among the highest prices in North America? Mr. Walker.
You know, I watched the leaders throughout this election make all these promises. They're both throwing billions and billions of dollars of new promises, and neither of them have any plan on how we're going to pay for it. We have $9 billion of deficit this year. That's 2% of our provincial GDP in 1 year. And for most people in this room, that's not a lot to show for it. I hate the idea that seniors and parents in this family going to the pump feel like they can't control that. It is painful when they have to spend $100 sometimes every week to put gas in their tank. But I am not going to promise that we're going to start cutting taxes until we actually start balancing the budget and start investing in our future in a more sustainable way.
Ms. Higginson?
Thanks. This is a government that actually is quite committed to, going after the big businesses and price gouging. And when it comes to fighting the price of gas, We are committed to fighting price gouging. In 2019, because there was so much talk about this, David Eby had an independent report that showed that BC Gas had an inexplicably higher than the rest of, gas was inexplicably higher than the rest of Canada by 13 cents a litre. So they they took action, and they implemented the Fuel Price Transparency Act, and that inexplicable difference is now down to 3 cents a litre. And so they're taking action where they can to have an impact on that. And I know that the cost of fuel impacts so many aspects of our life. It's not just at the pump. You face the impacts of this at the grocery store, as a farmer, when you're filling up all of the various implements that you need on the farm, and the price of bringing our food here. So when you can lower the price of fuel, an inexplicable difference by 10 cents a litre, that does make a big difference. And we are always looking out for people over profit, and one of the other ways that we are doing this is by reducing ICBC rates by $500 a year to give that money back to folks so that they can use them right now.
Mr. Walker, we saw a rebuttal sign. 1 minute.
That act led to a website. And if a website can take 10 cents a litre off the gas, I hope that this government puts out websites for our rentals and for food and all sorts of other things to bring down the cost for all of us.
Here's to a question on crime and public safety. As this region grows, those concerns rise in terms of community safety, people feeling safe in their own community, their own homes. What's your take on violent offenders and properly handling those offenders, prolific offenders in our communities with very complex issues? What can we do at the community level to help do something proactively to deal with prolific and violent offenders in our community? Stephanie.
You know, I can understand the concerns that people are feeling around this. I think we can all agree that our communities look and feel differently than they did 10 years ago. And everybody does deserve to feel safe in their own communities. They're facing real challenges with the toxic drug crisis, homelessness, mental health. But we are attempting and we are taking action to fight disorder, and the BC NDP government actually led the push to get the federal government to make changes to federal bail rules to keep repeat offenders off the streets. And they launched 12 new dedicated teams of police, prosecutors, and probation officers that are currently monitoring almost 400 repeat offenders across the province. And in the Nanaimo Regional District, there's much more to do to bring violent crime rates down, but we brought back the repeat offender management program, and it's making a difference here in Nanaimo. The Nanaimo RCMP said that since they have been implementing the Nanaimo Repeat Violent Offender Intervention Initiative, look at all these like new terms that we have to use, and ROVII, it's had actually an 80% detention rate, and of the 15 or so people who are being monitored right now, only one of them has been released back into the community. So we are taking action on this. The Premier is very clear on this and has fought at the federal level to be able to make sure that there were changes to bail reform so that we could have repeat offenders off the streets.
And same question to you, Adam. Repeat violent chronic offenders. It's an issue in this region. What's your stance on that?
It's a challenge. It wasn't that long ago that we saw somebody in this constituency that was attacked in a restaurant, very physically, and suffered significant consequences of that. The challenge is a provincial government always loves to blame the federal government for our problems. The repeat violent offender challenge that we have here has many roots. Poverty is a significant root. Mental health challenges are significant roots. We need to go upstream. The idea that we're just going to fix our justice system and set these new policies and it'll fix everything, it's just not the case. In our community, the question was, what can we do here locally? Restorative justice is a very strong program. When somebody breaks the law, when somebody finds themselves out of the bounds of normality, there are volunteers that connect these folks in the community with ways that they can give back. It has tremendous success. They've been asking government for years for an expansion of funding so that they can look after people. And I think that's a huge thing that we need to do. The question originally had a graph that was provided that showed all the stats, and you could see as soon as the NDP was elected, it was like crime went out of control. I don't think it's the NDP's fault, but we have seen a significant challenge in our community. You talk to the RCMP here locally, you talk to firefighters, the number of call-outs that they get for mental health calls and for violent offenses in our community, it's draining the system. And so I think restorative justice is a very easy thing we need to do. The other thing we need to do is hire some more judges. In the last year, we've doubled the number of people who have committed serious crimes, who have been released because they haven't been able to get access to justice in a timely way. That is a horrible thing for someone who has experienced a violent crime or a sexual crime to have the person that did that to you let go because our system didn't have enough judges to get that processed. That's something else we should be doing and making sure that these people get the justice that they deserve.
Our first question this evening on transportation drew a fun response with regards to the Island Rail corridor from the crowd. This one may as well. Vancouver Islanders know about challenges when sailing with BC ferries, whether it is staffing challenges, whether it is mechanical issues with the boats, or whether it is a scheduling issue on desired sailings. What do you identify as priorities to move forward and adjust and campaign and advocate for improvements to the BC ferry service as it serves as the marine highway, but given also the fact that the company has obvious public and private interests as well? Adam.
Well, I don't know if any folks are from Ladysmith, but that's also a BC Ferry contracted service, and we need to see some improvements there. But as far as the major routes, our vessels have never been older than they are right now. It was supposed to have been done in 2019 before the COVID, and then they said COVID was delaying it, and then there was some design plan, and then there was some RFP. We just need to get some darn boats. You know, how often do we have to miss our trips to Vancouver, trips to important places, whether it's medical trips, to see family, for work, because the ferry is out of service because of mechanical issues. Government's just announced they're going to do this RFP. We've heard that before. We need to get these boats built, and they should be built in BC. We should not be buying boats from other countries and then finding out that we can't repair the darn things when something goes wrong. So we got to get them built, we got to get them done here, and we got to make sure that we have a ferry service that people can rely on.
Ms. Higginson, your priorities and focus in terms of a reliable ferry connection, both through the Gulf Islands and obviously to the mainland as well.
Yeah, so I can actually relate to this one really well. My family has to go to the mainland every week, and sometimes it's on last minute, and we don't have the ability to make a reservation, and so we actually have a car share over there. So I've actually dubbed it Ferry Panic. We call it, you know, the hurry up and wait. You got to get there half an hour before your reservation, so you got to hurry up and get there, and then you wait. I wish, wouldn't it be nice if it was just this easy? Let's just get some darn boats built. It's that simple, isn't it? It's actually not that simple. And if it was that simple, then it would have been done. And this is, I think, one of the risks that we have with an independent candidate who oversimplifies things and acts like we can just fix everything by being in our community and only focusing in our community. And so this is a complicated issue, and I know nobody likes to hear a complicated issue, but the ferries have hired 1,200 new employees in 23 and 24. And we had a mid-range wage stabilization that helped with worker retention. So that means people stopped leaving to go work in other marine industries. And cancellations due to crewing issues have dropped this year, and 98.8% of boats sailed this year as a result, sailed as scheduled each day. And the mechanical failures are actually due to the fact that refits weren't being done at the right time. They weren't being done before the peak season. That has been fixed. They worked with C-SPAN to fix that problem. And we have gone from 21 million passengers to 24 million passengers since 2019. So that's a huge amount of new riders. And so we are going out. We've put it out to RFP to get these new boats, and they are committed to building the new boats. And we supplied $500 million to BC Ferries to keep fares low. Otherwise, they would have gone up 40% over 4 years. So we know the impact of the cost of those fares rising. It's not just how much you pay for your tickets. It would have impacted our food costs. So we put that money into it in order to make sure that Islanders could
Ms. Higgins, if you could wrap up, please.
Yeah, could remain confident that the fares would stay down. And John Rustad voted against that, just so you know.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mr. Walker, I saw a request for rebuttal. 1 minute.
Build the boats.
This next question revolves around First Nations reconciliation. Where do you see, and I'll start with you, Stephanie, relationships here in Ladysmith, Oceanside with our First Nations partners, reconciliation-wise, where they are, and where you see that they need to go moving forward with our First Nations partners?
Well, listen, I really believe that reconciliation and negotiated reconciliation treaties are the way to go forward. I co-chaired our Truth and Reconciliation Advisory Committee when I was on School District 68, and we were one of the first school districts, I think maybe the first, to have truth and reconciliation as a strategic goal with no example of what that meant to do. And so I worked with our 3 land-based nations at that time and the Mid-Island Métis and the Tilikum-Lalem Friendship Center to develop a plan for that. And it was sitting with the elders, and one of them said to me, "You're giving me hope, and I haven't had hope in many years." And so that was what actually guided me, was that North Star of keeping that hope alive and never letting it diminish. And I think, you know, for too long we have let court rulings navigate this, and we actually have forced nations and the province to fight each other. And it's been an adversarial and hurtful process, and that's why we can't go back to courts determining the outcomes of these. We need to respect our local nations. We need to develop these treaties in a negotiated way, because then we have control in a collaborative way what is happening and what the outcomes are. If you leave it to the courts, it's imposed and it is chaotic. And you can't have reconciliation until you settle the land question. It really has to be settled. You can't say you're going to have economic reconciliation without having social reconciliation, and you most certainly can't say you're going to have economic reconciliation without allowing the nations to have control of the land that they're on. And so that's a critical path forward, is that we continue on the BCNDP path of negotiated reconciliation agreements.
Same question for you, independent candidate Adam Walker. Reconciliation efforts here in the Mid-Island area, where are they now, and where do you envision them going? Where do you feel like they need to go?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that my friend here said. This is important work, and we need to make sure it's done right. Locally, the Timbuk Treaty is moving forward, and a lot of folks don't know that that's the case. Stenalius is moving very quickly through the treaty process, and that's exciting. We need to see that in this community for certainty. I would hope that the challenge as an independent, there's a lot of things I can do. Treaty negotiations is certainly not one of them as one lone voice there in Victoria. But what I would implore government to do through this is, as these treaty processes move forward, is find new and innovative ways to make sure that the community is aware of what's happening. The community, I'm not trying to find a forum where the community can have input and really change the trajectory. That's government to government work. But the challenge is a lot of folks here don't know what's going on with the treaty process. And I think it's very important that they are made aware of that they understand the opportunities that this provides, so that we can move forward through the reconciliation process together.
This question will be for Mr. Walker. Watershed security, land conservation has been identified as an issue of great importance for the region. As we sit here tonight, City of Parksville remains under stage 4 water restrictions due to water flows out of the Englishman River falling below a certain level. If elected as an MLA, what would you do to advocate in the BC Legislature for local governments to be able to take steps to protect these key watersheds, which are crucial in supplying safe, drinkable water for residents?
There's a couple things to look at. When you're in this community and you're looking at the mountains, that is all mosaic land. It's private managed forest land. This government in 2018 did a full review on that, and they asked people, what do you want to see, how these lands are managed? These private managed forest lands, by mosaic, they get massive tax breaks in exchange for managing these lands in an ecologically friendly way. And they're honestly not keeping up with government regulations. If you have BC timber sales or any of the other forestry tenure types, there's restrictions, significant restrictions for setbacks from rivers, the largest size of cut blocks. You don't see massive clear cutting. We need to review the Private Managed Forest Land Act. It's something the government promised a long time ago and has failed to deliver on. That is how we're going to ensure that we have water sustainability and ecological sustainability in this area. The other thing that I've done as an independent MLA in this area is we've got some really special land here. Coastal Douglas Fir, biogeoclimatic zone. This is a special place. There's very little of that left. And so we've actually gone through and mapped out some of this land and reached out to some private property owners for federal grants. It's not my lane. It's always fun to point fingers and blame other levels of government. But when they got pots of money and we can work as a community to try to protect and preserve that land, that's what we need to do. The last thing that I think is really important is that as we talk about protecting 30% of the province's land base, we need to make sure that some of that land is in our communities. I've talked to the Minister of Water, Land, Resource Stewardship about this a lot. Government's committed to protecting old growth, and they've done some things, but not what they promised. But the big one is this 30 by 30. We need to make sure that there's funds in this community so that some of these lands, like Hamilton Marsh, like some of these really special places, are protected and that local government isn't stuck footing the bill.
Ms. Higginson.
Thank you. This is such a critical issue, and I actually know that it's really critical because I live on a farm in the ALR on a river, and on Tuesday, water stopped coming out of the pipes at my house. Like, this is a critical issue. Luckily, we have a workaround. We can't drink the water right now, but it's, you know, it's happening. It's happening. Vancouver Island, as was pointed out, does have a lot of private forest land, and so it's really, really important for local governments to be able to navigate this issue so that we can have safe drinking water. And the province did, as was mentioned, has taken under a review of the private forest land management. And as an MLA for this area, when you're in government and in the party that forms government, you can push to ensure, I'm going to push to ensure that that review is completed, and so that we can actually see the outcome of that review. And the benefit of a collaborative process, I think, is what's really important here. Something like what happened with Cowichan, the Cowichan Weir, or the Clayoquot are really good examples on what we can touch on this issue and what's possible, what I think for also the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve. And that means brokering a conversation at the table with the landowners, with the local government, with the First Nations, with the Biosphere Reserve that finds a permanent solution and allows that upland water storage solution that is so necessary to this community. We need to ensure that we have safe drinking water for generations to come, and you do that by making sure that you have reliable and secure access to upland water storage that is necessary here. There's a $1 billion nature fund that, as your MLA, I can make sure, or I will advocate for, the Central Island to benefit from. There's the $100 million Watershed Security Fund to support local communities to make local decisions in partnership with First Nations and local stakeholders. This government recognizes the importance of this issue, and we're funding it, and we're going to make sure that we solve this issue locally.
Thank you, Stephanie. Adam, I saw a rebuttal, 1 minute.
So I've been a backbench member in a governing party, and you can say you're going to push for stuff, but you know, it doesn't work that way. These are commitments made by the Premier and through ministers, and I just don't want to get your hopes up with that. My concern is to say that water sustainability is so important. I registered my well 2 years ago or longer. I have not heard anything back from this government. Government talks about how we need to protect the shared asset that is water, and yet we've got farmers that are putting industrial well licenses in, making that request to government so that they can collectively be part of this management of water, and yet it hasn't happened. It has been 7 or 8 years now that this plan was supposed to take place. People have paid, I myself have paid hundreds of dollars for this license, and I've heard nothing back. If government takes water sustainability seriously, they will get these wells registered, and they will make sure that we have plans in place to make sure that we don't run out of water like you did.
Thank you. We talked a little bit earlier about cost of living. We didn't really touch a lot about housing and how to create more stock and in a variety of different forms, whether it be market, non-market housing. On that topic specifically, Stephanie, this is a really big issue in terms of cost, lack of inventory in this area. What should government's role be in helping to moderate and make just an overall healthier housing market here in the area?
I think it's no secret that this government believes that they need to be very involved in affecting change in this area, and are our competitors in the Conservative Party have said that they think that the government does not belong anywhere in the housing market. And we have a very comprehensive housing plan, and it was mentioned earlier that it's not working, but it is working. And just the other day, I was on a doorstep, and a woman said to me, I am so appreciative for the housing plan and for the end to the Airbnbs, because she leaned out, she said, do you see that house? Do you see that house? Do you see that house? 3, I think it was 3, it might have only been 2, there's been a lot of doors. But those houses used to be standalone Airbnbs, and now there's families living in them. It is working. I had another doorstep I was on where somebody whose house was destroyed in a fire a year ago could not find long-term accommodation for their family because she saw lots of accommodations online because they were being used for short-term accommodations. And so she was able to finally get into one, and she was able to convince them to let her stay. And with the changeover in the Airbnb rules, what she has seen now is that there is actually accommodation available for people. The work is not done. We are not saying that this work is done, but we have a comprehensive housing plan that cuts red tape and barriers to construction, takes on real estate speculators, restricts short-term rentals, and it's starting to work. We are seeing rental prices come down. They're coming down by about 10 to 15% depending on where you live in the province. They were high. There is no doubt they were high. I know people who have been priced out of the real estate market, and it is devastating, and they need support from families. But we are working on it, we are taking it on, and this is one of our #1 strategies that we are working on, and it is in policy, and it is working.
Thank you, Stephanie. Adam, cost of housing, supply, rental, and the market, non-market, what's your take on that? The provinces, this previous government had a lot of policy reforms on that, so what's your opinion as an independent with that?
It's a challenge when a candidate comes up here and says it's working. Housing's more affordable. You know, praise be, everything's fine here. It's not. The cost of housing in this community is really high, and a lot of families are struggling. People are leaving this province. We heard my friend here talk about how we've got the best job growth in the country. Well, last month reported by the province, we lost 10,000 jobs. The month before that, 9,700 jobs. The month before that, we lost 7,600 jobs. 30,000 job losses in the last 3 months of reporting period. GDP growth in this province is the worst in the country this year. There are great numbers and great data that we can point to when John Horgan was Premier, but that's not the reality we're living in today. The question is about what are we going to do about housing affordability. You have to look at this at a holistic level. You cannot just say, we've got a housing program that's working, we built 19,000 homes of affordable, and it's a lottery. You need to take a step back. Stephanie was saying that she doesn't believe in the idea of building new communities. After the war in England, they built new towns. They recognized the significant challenges of people coming back from the war and not having a place to live, people all at once having families. And the government stepped up and said, we're going to take this on head on. And it wasn't about government getting involved. It's not about government owning 40% of everybody's home. It's about setting up the policies in place so that the private market can build the homes, can get the units built, and can take the pressure off of communities like ours. Our community is growing so fast. It's so hard for our local government to keep up with the infrastructure costs, keeping up with doctors and everything like that here. We need to build new communities to take some of that pressure off of the housing market.
And a rebuttal was listed here from Stephanie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to be super clear. I didn't say praise be everything is solved, because I don't think it's solved. And if I thought it was solved, I wouldn't be running. The housing crisis is one of the #1 reasons why I decided to run. My child doesn't think he can afford to buy a home ever, and he might be right if we don't change things. I have family members who have been priced out of the rental market and needed support. And so this is a real problem, and it is not done. But what I do know is that if we want our community's voice reflected in one of the most comprehensive housing strategies in a generation, the one that is being looked at across the country with envy because it is so successful, that you need to have an MLA who is in the party that is in government so that you can make sure that your community's views and needs are reflected in those policies when they are put out.
I'm going to ask this evening's final question. We will not have the opportunity to take questions from the floor this evening. However, I invite those who would like to ask questions of the candidates to remain after the forum tonight for the meet and greet. The Auditor General for Local Government Office, tasked with conducting performance audits on the operations of various local government. The AGLC office was closed by the provincial government in March of 2021. Therefore, there is no oversight with regards to local government expenditures on behalf of taxpayers. I would like to ask your direction and your advocacy for the AGLC and its view over local government. Adam.
Thanks. I just want to touch on something that Stephanie said. She says you need somebody in government because otherwise government won't hear you. And I think any party that thinks that only MLAs in their party deserve to have communities listened to is not a government that we want in power. This idea of the Auditor General for Communities, it was disbanded a while ago, and we saw the impact of that. You know, the Wastewater Pollution Control Center in North Vancouver, billions of dollars over budget. People in communities, taxpayers, ratepayers, they want to have an additional level of oversight. I see no problem at all why that shouldn't exist, and I think the government should put what was a working institution back into place.
Stephanie.
Thanks. So I am familiar with the Auditor General for Local Government Office because when I was a BC School Trustees Association president, it was looked at quite closely as a model of possibly supporting oversight of school districts, so sort of an independent one as well. School districts often get overlooked, but we have huge budgets as well that are part of taxpayer dollars. The office closed because it wasn't being used appropriately in terms of it wasn't being taken advantage of. The service wasn't being used by local governments because there was a bit of a broken system there. And local governments are required by law to have an annual balanced budget, and they are required to have an annual audit. And these audits are done by regulated professionals, and occasionally they do uncover issues that local governments do need to deal with. And the AGLC was supposed to support local governments with their own oversight, but it just wasn't being used as it was envisioned, and it was spending money that wasn't being used as it was envisioned, and that's why it was closed. But it did produce a number of reports. When it was used, it produced a number of reports that do contain, I think, excellent information that local governments and even people in this audience can learn from those reports. But what I encourage people to do is to, I don't want to tell local governments what they should or shouldn't be doing because that's not actually my job. That's your job. You elect them. And so what I really do is encourage people to talk to your local governments about what they're doing regarding their own performance audits, because the audits I just talked about are not performance audits, but local governments have the ability to implement their own performance audits. And I'm always going to be available as an MLA to help broker those conversations if people aren't getting the answers that they need. But I will always work with the local government to support them in their transparency and accountability efforts. And ultimately, I think the oversight lies with the voters and the electorate during the election
Thank you,
time.
Ms. Higginson. Mr. Walker, your rebuttal for 1 minute.
I like the line, I don't want to tell local governments what to do. And yet all last fall was the provincial government telling local governments how they failed in housing and they're going to rezone the whole province. And they've taken away the public's opportunity to speak at public hearings. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Okay, and now for closing statements for 2 minutes, just to wrap up, to summarize your positions before a very captive audience here at Tainamara. Stephanie, you went first off the top for the introduction, so we'll go with actually Adam first, just to switch up the order here. 2 minute concluding address here tonight.
I want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. 250 chairs, it's almost completely full, and we've got lots of elected officials in the room, including Chief Rakalma here with the Qualicum First Nation. It's important that people come out and get involved and ask their candidates, those who show up, what it is that they're going to do to represent you in Victoria and to build a stronger community here. since I became an independent MLA, I went from having 2 staff in my office to 6 staff. And we've been able to actually tackle a lot of the challenges in our community that we were not able to get any traction with in Victoria. We built a plan for a new primary care center, a new health center in Parksville, 15 patient exam room clinic that we're hoping that we can get going on right after this election and keep it going. We've got some challenges in housing, and one of the challenges is that our local nonprofits don't have the capacity to put the grant applications in to get the housing built. Our community is very highly needed for housing, and we have the capacity in our office to work with these providers to get those applications in a solid way. It's been an absolute honor to serve this community and all of you in my capacity, and I just want to end by thanking you all for staying involved, because this is what makes this community the greatest place in the world to live. So thank you all for being a part of this.
Stephanie Higginson, 2-minute closing address.
Thanks. I want to thank my organizers, the organizers, and my fellow candidate. And all of you have taken the time to be here tonight. And I'm really disappointed that the other candidates didn't take the time to come this evening. It's very disappointing. The town hall was organized by a local government. Questions were sent in by the electorate. It was, hosted by the hospital board. It's on one of the most important issues that we're facing. And they're a great chance for people to hear what we have to offer and to help you make an important decision about our community, about your future, and about BC's future. And I think that tonight's shown that there's a clear choice between 2 parties who can form our next government, because it will be between 2 parties who form our next government. And ironically, it's the choice between a party who's always shown up to take care of people and one that has not literally shown up. I do find it interesting, though, as we've heard that, from our independent MLA who's talked about this evening about how much he's been able to get done, and yet at the same time complain that nothing's getting done. And I find that to be an interesting dichotomy. And as we face so much uncertainty in our community, you deserve to have somebody who is sitting at the table with the decision makers, influencing public policy to make sure that our needs are reflected in the decisions that are being made. And during my time as the BC School Trustees Association president, I built relationships with important members of government, and because my track record of collaboration and collaborative leadership, I was able to keep those relationships, and I've relied on those relationships over the course of the election. I've been able to call ministers, and I will continue to use those skills to serve our community. With David Eby and the BC NDP team, I will be better able to tackle the challenges head on to make your life better and build strong and thriving communities. And that is my commitment to you from the day that I get elected.
Thank you, Stephanie.
That concludes our questions for this evening. We'll turn it back over to Vice Chair Stuart McLean of the RDN Board to wrap things up, and again invite you to stick around after as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Much appreciated. Thank you to everyone for coming tonight, and thank you for your interest in the community. Thank you to our candidates, those who came, for your participation and sharing your perspectives on all the topics that were covered. Thank you to our moderators for volunteering for this. It's much appreciated. And thank you to the Nanaimo staff. If you'd like to stick around, the doors will be open to about 9, and you'll have a chance to mingle and meet your candidates. So again, thank you for coming. Have a good evening.